Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and a lot of you have seen what's been going on across the country with an enormous and an amazing number of protests going on in cities across America. And the question that everyone keeps asking is, after you finish protesting, what do you do? What's supposed to happen after that? And a person who has a very strong opinion on this is a friend of mine, Ken Williams. Ken Williams is a former Brockton police detective who also runs a company called K. Will and Associates, which is a firm that investigates many things, one of which would be wrongful death cases. And so I want to ask my brother Ken, how you doing today?
How you doing, Doctor? Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here. I'm always happy to talk to you because people enjoy hearing from you because you provide really good, really accurate, really precise information. And so you reached out because you mentioned that you have an idea on ways that a certain kind of legal action can be pursued that might help people deal with some of these problems that we've seen in police departments, whether it's police brutality, misconduct, police terror, harassment, things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. A couple of years ago, I filed an action that was under seal with the federal court. It was put under gag order back in 2012 by the federal DOJ, Department of Justice. And today I'm able to discuss that litigation because it was recently unsealed just this year. And basically what the litigation involves is taking what's called a Civil War era law and applying that Civil War era law to today under what's called a False Claims Act. And under the False Claims Act, it's not like it's unique. It's not like your normal litigation processes, which involve a litigant, a plaintiff, and a single action to recover damages for a single person. Under the False Claim Act, what I'm doing, and it's a very novel approach to hold police wrongdoers accountable, is instead of looking at individuals and just trying to attack those individuals within the institution, under the False Claims Act, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the entire police institution. Right now, the False Claim Act is looking at the Brockton Police Department in Massachusetts. But what will probably happen over time is other litigants from other police departments will join in this action, and it will basically grow to becoming a False Claims Act, False Claims Act in different jurisdictions involving many different litigants that are whistleblowers. This is very important and very timely, I feel, based on the fact that, there are many people who are protesting, the rights of, they're looking at black life not being considered or perceived as valuable as white life with many members in the police institution. When we say that, we go back to basically the 14th Amendment, where the 14th Amendment, when it was passed, it basically says that it's supposed to guarantee equal protections under the color of law for all individuals. And since the passage of the 14th Amendment, which freed slaves, freed black people, and brought us into the light of having protections under the color of law, we've been wrangling with this thing for, since the 1864, 1865 mark, since the passage of the 14th Amendment. And since when we move forward in history and we look at Title VII, which was enacted in 1964, even Title VII was looking at property rights of individuals under the color of law. And when I say property rights, I'm talking about your right to have an equal, your right to have an equal shake at getting a job, just as a white person has. Equality under the law to go and make sure that, no matter of your color, your religion, your nationality, your gender, you're going to have equality to white men, because historically we have white men that oppressed us, and that's what led from slavery to emancipation to Jim Crow and all these different steps in history. So what the False Claim Act looks at doing is, instead of trying to find these individuals that are responsible and attacking them under a litigation claim, It attacks everybody that's a good cop and a bad cop in a litigation claim. So what the idea is it will force those good cops who are receiving federal grant monies to look at their jobs, look at their pay, and stop having these bad cops hide behind them inside a taxpayer-sponsored entity. Ultimately, when we say the police are accountable to the citizens, the False Claim Act litigation that I have launched with the help of my legal team brings the accountability back to making sure that the police understand they are accountable to every taxpayer citizen, every citizen of the United States. They are accountable. Right now, we have too many people out there that are out there operating on different guidelines, and they have their own biases that they're bringing to that job. They understand that they're bringing those biases to that job, and they're not protecting and serving black people the same as white people. And under the color of law, the federal government's responsible for making sure we have equality and that we're protecting every citizen equally. That's the genesis of what we have going on today.
That's really interesting. So, effectively, when you mention involving good and bad cops together, are you basically saying that there would be some sort of either incentive or some sort of positive or negative reinforcement to convince good cops to blow the whistle on bad cops? Is that kind of how it works?
Certainly. There is a benefit, financial benefit, for coming forward as a whistleblower, and that incentive is mandated by law. The False Claim Act law has been very successful for the United States government in Medicare fraud. It's been successful in pharmaceutical fraud. It's been successful going back to the Civil War era days, where you had Southern companies that manufactured goods falsely. For instance, uniforms back in the 1800s. Southern companies manufactured uniforms, said that they were great, or they manufactured ammunition that had sawdust in them. Uniforms that when the people went out into the rain, the uniforms would fall apart. The False Claim Act looks at the fact that if you're certifying that you're doing or performing a good service, you have to guarantee that service. And what I'm looking at doing is taking that False Claim Act certification that the United States government is receiving from police departments that say that they're not going to be anti-discriminatory. They're not going to have anti-discriminatory hiring practices, firing practices, promotional opportunities. They're not going to have excessive force claims. They're not going to have hate crime claims. All of these things that we're talking about and people are marching for today, they're the taxpayer citizens. They deserve a refund because there are too many institutions committing fraud against the taxpayers.
Wow. So, that's interesting. I when you brought this to me, I thought about this and I said, wow, I don't think a lot of people are aware that that many of these taxpayer-funded institutions have an obligation to do many of the things that you mentioned, to not discriminate and to not do many of the things that we know police departments around the country have been caught doing. And so, why do you think it is that that the False Claim Act has not been applied in the past as readily as it should be? I mean, why hasn't a Ferguson been forced to pay up, or NYPD, when we kind of have just so much documentation showing that they're violating many of the things that you talked about?
Right. I mean, when we look at Ferguson and we're talking about Ferguson is a great example. Ferguson is a town that's a predominantly black town today. And when you look at the police department is not mimicking the demographics of the town. It has, I believe, somewhere around 50 or 60 police officers. Maybe 2 or 3 of them are minority. So under the False Claim Act, it has to be addressed. Why isn't there diversity in that police department? So what are the hiring practices? What are the recruitment practices? What are the training mechanisms? And when they received federal grants, for instance, it could be federal grants from the National Highway Transportation. Have they been racially profiling and stopping blacks under federal grant dollars? Have they taken COPS grants that were instituted since 1995? Have they been discriminatory in their hiring practices to avoid hiring brown and black people, women? These are the type of things that this type of False Claim Act can address. Now, to answer your question, why hasn't it been something that's used or litigated against police departments before? When we look at the history going back to when President Clinton was in office, he instituted back in 1995 the COPS grants. The COPS grants were a mechanism for the country to hire 100,000 police officers throughout the nation. It was at that time that police departments, local police departments, started signing for these grant dollars. They would have some sort of financial match in some instances. When they hired somebody, the feds would pick up the dollar for the first, or the salary for the first year, and then over the course of 3 years, the town or the city would then start to fund that officer 100%. So now it becomes a question of, since 1995, they've spent somewhere around $15 billion in the COPS program. So when we look at since 1995 and we look at the conditions on the ground today, where we have many people complaining about excessive force, many people complaining about belligerent language being used and directed towards them based on their nationality or their color. When we look at the fact that the hiring practices, even though there's been this consent decrees in some instances with some of these agencies, they've even violated some of those hiring practices under a consent decree. Now, the federal government, because when it gives you the money, it says you must certify that you're not going to be discriminatory, and not discriminatory at the local level, discriminatory at the federal level. And this is very important because when you're looking at anti-discrimination law at the federal level, it's very specific. And when these agencies take that money and they commit fraud against the taxpayer, either in waste, fraud, or abuse of those taxpayer dollars, under the False Claim Act, they can owe back treble damages, 3 times the amount that they took, as a penalty against the taxpayers that they committed fraud against. This is a vehicle that can be used to make sure that the taxpayer citizens are back in front of this thing and showing that they are responsible for paying out the taxpayer dollars to support the police institution, and that the police officers need to understand they are accountable to the people.
And so, to ask more specifically about this action as it applies to what's going on right now across the country, you said you and your legal team are actually working to file some of these suits. I mean, how does that process work for you guys in terms of getting this done and applying this?
Certainly. I mean, of course, it requires someone like myself. I am a whistleblower. I am the first filer of the complaint. I understand, 1964, when we look at black police officers that were hired since 1964, we have to understand what our purpose and what the struggle was prior to 1964. When you had, marches in Selma, and you had white men in uniform with a badge and gun and a billy stick out there beating people across their head and spraying them with fire hoses under the color of law. Black people, brown-skinned people, we were hired because this checks and balances and the equality from Title VII in 1964 was to establish equilibrium and hold people accountable within these institutions. Black men who are in these jobs, we have a responsibility, now that we're 50 years into Title VII, we have a responsibility to make sure that we carry forward the civil rights process of equality by not accepting the money and turning a blind eye to what we're seeing and hearing. Accepting the money and understanding it's your responsibility to correct these wrongs, these abuses that are long-standing in the community. The community is looking at us to go and make sure that we take care of these injustices. They're not expecting us to sit there and get wealthy and fat and forget about the communities that we came from. The police departments aren't operating in they're not from Mars. They're from the community. The members of the police departments are from those communities. They went to the high schools, the grammar schools. They know the teachers. They may have been your next door neighbor at some point in time. So if there is racism inside a police department, it's just a representation of the racism that's going on outside that police department. Those black men, brown men, and women that are in the uniform, you got to hold those white men accountable.
All right. Well, I love it, and I would argue, and I agree with you. I think that many of the perpetrators of this injustice are certainly white men, but I think, in all fairness, and I think you agree with me on this, it's really about holding bad cops accountable, right? And we
Sure.
know bad cops can be any ethnicity, right? You and I both understand that very well, I'm sure. You more so than myself. And so, and also, just also out of fairness to everybody. I've seen some white men out there marching, on behalf of Eric Garner. I've seen some white cops that, have done the right thing, right? So I think that while we know it's a racial issue, we can also acknowledge that it's not entirely a racial issue, right? It's ultimately good versus bad, progress versus, a lack of progress, if you will, or going backward. And I think that this is great. I love the fact that you're laying out a strategy to confront this issue as opposed to just marching and holding hands and singing "We Shall Overcome." We've done that for 50 years. Now let's try something else. Well, I love everything you're saying, and I want to support it. I want you to just keep us posted if you can, on everything as it happens, as it moves forward. And by the way, I'm going to tell everybody how they can follow up and get in touch with you. If I say something wrong, just chalk it up to the fact that I'm stupid and crazy half the time. But everybody, this is Mr. Ken Williams. He is a 20-year veteran of the Brockton Police Department, and just a great black man. And also, he is the founder of the company K. Will and Associates. And the website is, what's the website?
kwillservices.com.
kwillservices.com. See, I knew I was going to mess something up. K-Will Services, not K-Will and Associates. But either way, I want everybody to follow up. And if you have something that you think that Mr. Williams can help you with, please reach out to him. Now, make sure you're ready to, the services are not going to be free, I'm sure. But I think if you are willing to invest in fixing the situation you're dealing with, he is a man that I trust and a man that I respect. So I want to say thank you very much, Mr. Williams. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Doctor.
Absolutely. And everybody who's watching, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and thank you for checking us out. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.